Years and years and years into the job, I'm thinking, I got to get a confession. I got to get a confession. And it's simply not true. Sometimes the better thing is the provable lie.
Have you ever seen the movie Training Day?
All right, listen, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, okay?
Even though Denzel Washington's character was a villain in the movie, that point is so true because evidence makes or breaks a case when it comes to police work. And one of the most effective ways to gather evidence is through interviewing people when it comes to witnesses, suspects, victims. But the way that detectives or patrol officers can talk to people, that's a game changer. So how do investigators in particular get people to open up? Well, today I'm joined by Jon Rappa. He's a former homicide detective and has worked in law enforcement for well over 2 decades. And he is also author of the incredible book, Extracting the Truth. And in this video, he's going to lay out some skills that people can utilize starting right now, particularly law enforcement officers, when it comes to getting suspects to open up, getting a confession, but also proving lies. So even if you're not in law enforcement or just curious about how investigators get people to talk, this is the video for you to watch. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, John, well, I appreciate you being on the channel. And I just wanted to say, first thing to anyone who's aspiring to work as not only a police officer, but like have a goal of being a detective, what quick bit of advice would you give them on how to earn that position at some point during their career?
One of the first things I tell people when they come to me, the guys at work, and they come to me and they say, hey, I want to be a detective. You need to show and cut your teeth right from the streets. You have to show the interest. So many times, there's 2 types of cops. There's the cops that go and take a report and that's it. They move on to the next call. You know this. And then you have the cops that go out there and they actually take the report and then they do some follow-up with it as well. And they try to resolve the case. See, typically what happens is you get the call, you show up to a call, the first responder, the patrol officer, and they'll take the report and they'll send it to the detective division if it's a felony or so forth, depending on the agency. And then what happens is this, the good officers, the officers that want to be detectives in the future, rather than send that upstairs right away, they'll hold on to it and they'll show their worth. They'll show that they can do follow-up investigation. And the reps are important. It's not just that you're showing somebody, it's actually getting those reps in to get better at it. And then of course, just refining your people skills, your talking skills. You know, I think 80% of what a detective does is talking, getting those leads, getting people to trust you, victim, witness, or suspect. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely good advice. And when it comes to someone finally earning detective spot, obviously a point of, or a part of that assignment is interview and interrogation. And
Yes.
I loved your book, Extracting the Truth. I will
Thank you.
apply it more for getting the truth out of my kids because I don't work in law enforcement
It
anymore.
works. It works.
No, I mean, through your book, I was reflecting on my own career of times when I messed up during interviews, and I did. I mean, I'll admit it.
Sure.
But there were also times when I implemented some of this stuff, and I didn't even know it at times.
Right.
But you put it pen to paper, and this was a great book. I recommend any aspiring detective to get this, any patrol officer to get it as well. This book was incredible. So let's just dive in a little bit to some of the things you wrote about and implemented during your time working as a detective, particularly homicide. So one of the first things I came across that I noticed was you said those doing interviews, particularly detectives, you have to go on facts, not theories. So can you give an example of that from looking back on your time as a detective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the layperson, the non-law enforcement officer can relate to this. You sit down, you watch one of these homicide episodes. They're huge. Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, and you start to watch like 48 Hours or some of these other shows. And instinctively, everybody sits back, because I still do it, and we start to develop a theory right away. Oh, this happened, oh, it's this person. And sometimes we're wrong. So it's fun when you're sitting on the couch watching television and you're trying to come up with your theory. But in reality, you have to solve a case. You have a case, right? And let's say hypothetically, and in my book, I write about this scenario, you have a homicide victim at let's say a hotel known for drug sales and so forth, a high crime hotel, a low-end motel. And at some point, you got a dead body, right? The pockets, the victim's laying on the ground. There's drug paraphernalia everywhere. It's indicative of drug sales and things of that nature. His pockets are turned inside out. Naturally, your inner self is going to scream, hey, this is a drug rip gone bad, right? So now, if you just go off of what you see and you start to develop a theory and not really go off of the evidence and the fact, you're going to overlook some things. Like now you're looking for his drug suppliers, maybe some of his customers, and you're going down the wrong alley, where if you just took a deep breath and you started looking at the facts of the case, you start to realize you got to do victimology, and you say, who is this person with? Who is their significant other? You start to go through the phone. You see that there was an argument between him and his girl. In reality, it wasn't a drug rip. In reality, it was a domestic violence gone bad, and she just decided to take the money afterwards as an afterthought, right? And so it looked like a drug rip. So that's going off of fact and not theory. When you go off of theory, you chase your tail. And where it aligns with doing an interview is we want to avoid guilt presumptive interrogations. When we sit down with the suspect, the last thing we want to do is interrogate the wrong person, accuse the wrong person of a crime, because what if we're wrong? And so I truly believe if you're going to ask a suspect to tell you what they did and you're going to accuse them of a crime, there has to be evidence wrapped around it. It can't be a gut feeling. And so that's kind of what I equated to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And you equated in the beginning interviewing to sales tactics. How does sales relate to concepts you can apply for an interview?
So it's absolutely amazing how closely related the two are.
It really
You know
is.
this. Yes, I was doing a lot of research putting my class together many years ago. And truth be told, at one point I even thought about leaving law enforcement. And what am I good at? I'm really not good at anything else. But I think I'm a people person. So I said, well, let me think about sales. So I started watching seminars. I started reading some books. And I realized that what we do in the interview is the same identical thing that a salesperson does. So let me give you an example. I'll give you two examples really quickly. One of the first things a good salesperson will do, especially if they're doing high-end sales, is welcome and rapport. They're going to try to build a rapport with that person. And think about going to a car dealership and you walk in there and the first thing we think of is that snake that runs to you and go, wow, what kind of car can I put you in? What can I do this with? And you think to yourself, come on, man, let me breathe. Where a good car salesman will approach you and start asking you about you and what you do for a living and just try to build rapport and ease the tension, reduce your resistance right away. It's the same thing with an interview. Whether you're with a victim, witness, or a suspect, everybody's resistance is high. A suspect extremely high, but victims, they were just victimized of a crime. Sometimes you have to develop a relationship with that person. Yeah. Welcome and rapport, right? I call it a reducing resistance, just building rapport with people. And the other thing is this. Let's talk about finding the need. Let's forget victims, witnesses for a second. Let's just look at suspects. There's always a reason why somebody does something. Well, there's always a reason why somebody wants to buy a product. So let's say hypothetically we take that car scenario. I go back into the car dealership. My daughter's 15. She'll be 16 next year. True story. And we're going to look at buying a car. My reasoning, my route for wanting to buy that vehicle is going to be safety. It's going to be if she gets into an accident, what is going to protect her, right? Her route is going to be different. If I was one of those rich parents who said, here's money, go buy yourself a car, it's going to be completely different. It's going to be how many friends can she fit in it and how cool will she look? A 16-year-old mindset and an old man's mindset are different things. And our route is different. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to an interview when you're talking to a suspect. There's always a reason why somebody commits a crime. Their route might be different. If you got a drug addicted person who committed a burglary, their reasoning for committing that burglary is going to be different than a bunch of juveniles car hopping, if that makes sense, where one is peer pressure, just out to have a good time. The other is, man, I needed to feed my addiction. And so I went into that car, took some money, took some change so that I can buy my dope. So there's always a reason why. So it's welcome and rapport. And of course, in one of the chapters, I call it finding the need. That's finding the root, what I just explained.
Yeah. And when it comes to the rapport building, you did mention in the book, you advise people to introduce yourself via first name, not like rank. Can you expand upon that?
Yes. Make that badge disappear. We have a reputation in law enforcement. Let's just face it. Half the country supports us, and it seems, I think more than half the country supports us, but it seems if you read the internet, on the comment on the internet, you see CNN and you watch the media will tell you that the entire country hates you. Regardless, you've got to make that badge disappear. I have a victim who wants, I want to get justice for that victim, right? And so they may be a little reluctant to talk to me. Maybe they've had an upbringing where they don't trust the police. I still want to help that person out. I have a witness who saw things that is going to help that victim out. It's going to help us get closer to the offender, right? I need them to trust me. And of course, with the suspect, I want them to talk to me, right? So at the end of the day, I can't take the badge off, but I can make it disappear by just appearing human. And it's just a sign of respect. I'm not above you. We're the same. I just have a job. And so I like to shake hands. I shake everybody's hand and I introduce myself by my first name. That's especially when I'm in the box. Out on the field, officer safety is an issue. I may not, shake their hand right away, but quite often I do.
What did you mean by the box?
Very good. I'm sorry. I'm using that lingo. The box, the interview room, the interrogation room.
There you go.
And whether it's a soft interview room where somewhere we bring a victim or a witness, or the actual interview room where we're talking to a suspect, I'm going to shake their hand. Even out on the field, whether I give them a fist bump or sometimes if somebody's in handcuffs, I'll put my hand on their shoulder, introduce myself by my first name. My rank I'm a sergeant, but I don't, nobody really, they see the stripes, they see the badge, they know who I am. I'd rather just be informal about it and let them know I'm not above you, we're together, and we have a common goal. So you got to make that badge disappear.
Yeah, you got to make it disappear. And you also brought up the very key aspect. I mean, you brought up a lot, but one thing that stuck out to me, because I remember it helped me a lot during my career, was I don't have to like somebody, and I don't most of the time I was just shocked at some of the things that they were doing, and I was having to interview them or arrest them. But there was a level of one, respect. We're all people. Nobody's perfect, but
Absolutely.
empathy. Now that I
Empathy.
realized when you show empathy, you can get people to talk. So
Absolutely.
how during your career, or what do you advise, like give advice on when it comes to empathy, when it comes to interview and stuff like that?
It is your most powerful tool as an interviewer. If somebody was to ask me, and I get asked this all the time, because I teach all across the country, and people ask me all the time, hey, what is your best tool? I tell them empathy. That's it, hands down. Empathy is your best tool. Nobody is going to, victim, witness, or suspect, nobody is going to open up to somebody who's judging them. And I want
Mhm.
you to, we're going to take the extreme really quick, right? Murder, I worked homicide for many years. Homicide is the extreme, but the other extreme is, I don't know what we can say without getting YouTube channel struck, so maybe you beep it out, but sexual pedophiles, right? And that's the extreme, right? And so imagine how hard it would be for that person to open up and talk to me when I'm judging them the way I truly feel about them, right? Most of society, looks down on these guys because they do some horrible things and horrific things to people, to young children that follows them for the rest of their life.
Mhm.
But I got to get justice for that victim, for that child. I have to. And if I walk in the interview room or I introduce myself and I'm judging them and I'm making them feel this low, they're not going to open up to me. So I'm going to show them some empathy. Do I do when it comes to somebody like that? No, I probably don't mean it, but I'm going to show the empathy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll be honest with you. I think what happens is over the years, I have become an extremely empathetic person just because I've arrested so many people that I truly genuinely feel bad for. I still have a job to do. You do something, I have to take, there's nothing you can do about it. But I think I find myself more empathetic than most, but it's helped me out immensely during my interviews.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. And I'm glad we talked about that. Now, when it does come to like more outside of approach, the strategy behind the interview, you made it very clear. Like you got to go into the room, the box, with some clear objectives.
Sure.
So, what kind of objectives are we talking about? Like goals a detective should have?
Absolutely.
What do you mean?
Yeah, so every case, every scenario is going to be a little bit different. You might have a witness that you already know witnessed X, Y, and Z, but they didn't witness A, B, and C. And so I have to have my goals clearly defined. What am I trying to get out of this witness? If this is my second or third interview with the victim, what am I trying to get out of this person this time? What am I trying to learn now, right? And with a suspect, it's the same identical thing. I do what's called framing my questions around the known facts and the evidence. And so I'm going to ask questions that I know the answers to without telling them what I'm doing. And every case, every scenario is different, but I have to go in there with a game plan. Absent a confession, if the suspect doesn't confess to me, what's the next best thing? Who do I need to place him with? Where do I need to place them, right? What activities do I need them to admit that they did? Which may seem minimal to them, but to me, it's everything. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about the provable lie here in just a few minutes, but having that game plan, at the beginning of my career, I would just go in and talk to people. And I realized if I just set my goals, my interview may have a mind of its own and take off on me. But if I set my goals, I know at the very least, I need to learn this about them, victim, witness, or suspect. I need to learn this, that, and the other. So I think going in there prepared for anything, whether it's, if you're in the sports, you don't just go play, you practice, right? You hit the field, you practice. It's the same thing with SWAT. You don't practice once a year. You get those reps in, right? And you have a game plan. You draw out the design, you draw out the house, you know what you're doing. It's the same thing with the interview. I'm going to have my game plan and it's just going to guide me better, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And I remember looking back, I would go into interviews without really objectives, game plan.
Yeah,
It was just let me see if I can get a confession, and that was a
right.
goal. But I did not make enough plan. Like I said, extracting the truth really helped me look back and go, wow, I was faltering in some things. But
Yeah.
you brought it up. Let's go ahead and go there. The provable lie.
So it's funny. I've talked to so many prosecutors, and I didn't know this initially. Years and years and years into the job, I'm thinking, I got to get a confession. I got to get a confession. And it's simply not true. Sometimes the better thing is the provable lie. They're called false exculpatory statements. It's when you can lock somebody down to a lie. And so a lot of people don't realize that. And it's something that took me years to figure out. So when I go around the country and I teach this to cops, especially newer cops, I tell them, don't get frustrated when people lie to you. That's why we ask questions that we know the answers to, and we frame our questions around the known facts and the evidence. If somebody lies to me, I don't want the small lie. I want the big lie. The bigger the lie, the harder they fall. I want the lie that a jury won't believe, that a jury won't find plausible, right? I don't want a small lie where the jury can go, oh yeah, I can kind of see that. I want the big lie. So the lie, the false exculpatory statement, in some prosecutors' eyes, is better than the confession because it's nearly impossible, not impossible, but nearly impossible to suppress. And for those who don't understand what that means, sometimes when you obtain evidence, whether it's through a search or through a confession, defense attorneys are going to try to suppress that evidence, right? That's the best thing that's what they can hope for, right? Is to suppress the evidence so the statement doesn't make it into court, maybe because we were coercive or we said something that we shouldn't have said, right? We forgot to read Miranda, whatever the deal might be. It's hard, as long as you get through Miranda and you do what you're supposed to do, it is hard to suppress a provable lie because there's nothing coercive. You can't even interpret it as coercive. You're just sitting down, asking questions, and they're lying to you. It's not trying to get that confession. So prosecutors love that. And it's something that took me a long time to figure out.
Can you give an actual example of a case without giving people's actual names when the provable lie was more than the confession? Does anything come to mind? I know I put you on the spot right there, and we can edit
Yeah,
this
no,
out.
I can. I mean, God, I use this all the time. So, like, I don't remember what I referenced in the book. Let's say, hypothetically, you have a scenario where somebody's committing a burglary in the parking lot at a mall, and you have evidence, right? Because I said before, you never want to be guilt presumptive when you interview somebody or when you try to get a confession from a suspect. You want to have evidence. So you have, let's say, hypothetically, they're walking through the mall parking lot, burglarizing cars. You got automatic license plate readers. You have surveillance footage at the mall of them sneaking around looking into cars, right? Maybe nothing concrete of them breaking into cars, but you can see that they're peering in. You got the automatic license plate readers that puts them in the city. They're all over the country now, so it's hard to get away with that. And let's say hypothetically, when you pull them over, there's change that was stolen from other cars, money and change that you find in their possession. So what I would do is frame my questions around the known fact. I already know that they were in the area. I already know that they were in the parking lot. I already know that they have change. So I'm just going to play stupid, play dumb, and just ask the questions and find out where they were. And the statement that I want, if they're not going to confess to me, the statement I want is, hey, where were you today? Oh, I just got into town. I live about an hour away. Were you in town 30 minutes ago when the burglary happened? Were you in town 30 minutes ago? No, I literally just got into town about a minute or two ago, right before you guys pulled me over. Hey, were you ever at the mall today? No, I just said I just got into town. All right, very good. Hey, did you take anything out of any cars today? No, absolutely not. I told you where I was. That's the statement I want because I can prove that to be incorrect. I can prove that to be a lie. I can show the jury it's not plausible. I can show the jury, or the state can show the jury, listen, he said X, Y, and Z. He said he wasn't in the mall, or he said he wasn't in the neighborhood. He just got here. But we've got automatic license plate readers of him rolling around the city for the last 30, 40 minutes, last 2 hours, right? We have that evidence. In fact, he said he was never in the mall parking lot, but we have him peering in the cars, right? So we know that this is what he did. Now, let's take it a step further, and plus we found the change, right? So we have all of those lies that we can prove. Let's say he never confesses. You have the lie coupled with the evidence. It's a beautiful case, and cops and investigators need to start concentrating more on that, in my opinion, than the confession. Confession is great, but this is beautiful evidence. Now let's take it a step back. Let's say I walked in there and I didn't do what I teach. And I walked in there and said, hey, I'm going to ask you some questions that I know the answers to. Before you answer me, understand I have you on video, I have your license plate reader, and I know you stole the money because I found it in there. So what were you doing in the city? What were you doing at the mall? I was going to the mall to go shopping. That's plausible to a jury. Well, why were you looking around cars? Well, I wasn't looking around cars. I got lost and I didn't know where I parked. So I was kind of walking around. Yeah, it looks suspicious, but that's plausible to a jury. I don't want that, right? I want the big lie. So that's kind of where I go when I talk about the provable lie and false exculpatory statements, framing your questions around the known evidence and asking questions that you know the answers to, right?
Without telling them the evidence.
Never tell them what you know. Yeah, never tell them what you know, ever. Because if you do, they will tailor their story around what you told them. And that story will be plausible to the jury. And that's not what you want. If they're going to lie to you, let's get the big lie.
I got you. And then
Yeah.
I remember reading something in the book about minimization. Now, this is someone,
Yes.
if I remember correctly, it's like if someone's done something serious, you're not trying to justify it by any means, but you minimize it,
No.
correct? Just all in
Sure.
an effort to keep them to continue opening up.
Yeah, so some of the minimization strategies we'll talk about off the top of my head was, one of the things that's very simple. When I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm not going to call it a murder or a robbery or a burglary. Instead, I might say if I'm dealing with a robbery, I'm going to say you took something. If I'm dealing with a burglary, I don't want to say you broke into that house and burglarized the house. You went into the house, right? You didn't steal anything, you took something. And so you think it's semantics, but you'll be surprised when you start throwing out the big words that has, prison and jail and punishment attached to it. It scares people. I want to have that conversation for longer, so I'll use those softer words. That's what I call it. And then, of course, you can use the minimization. There's all kinds of different strategies. One of them is normalizing the incident. It is easier for people to admit to something when everyone else is doing it, right? Studies show that we look to the actions of others to see what's acceptable and what's normal. And so when you can have that conversation using some of those soft words, and you can frame it as this is a very common thing, it's a very normal thing, it lessens the guilt that that person feels, or the shame that that person feels, and it's easier for them to talk to you about it. Now, I will say, if you don't mind, I will say the time you should never use minimization is you should never minimize punishment. That leads to false confessions. When I say minimize punishment, you don't want to ever let them believe that they can't get in trouble, that it is a lighter crime, that, they're not going to go to jail, that, you can't lie to people, and you don't want to do that. So one of the things that I tell people is never minimize. It's okay to use soft words. It's okay to do some of those things, but it's never okay to minimize the outcome or the punishment. If they, and I always tell my guys, if they ask you if they're going to jail, you got to be honest with them. Yeah, you're going to jail. Absolutely. Let's have this conversation, right? So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. I had some good instructors in the beginning that made it also very clear you can never make promises to someone.
Right.
Yeah, do not make
Ever.
promises.
Yeah.
At all. So, Jon, last few questions for you here.
Sure.
When it comes to newer officers, those getting into the profession and they're aspiring to be detectives one day, or they're just new to the profession and they're watching this video, what mistakes do you commonly see for those who don't have experience yet? To which, look, no judgment. Everybody starts at some point. So, what things do you see and they can avoid, and thus just help them get better at their job?
It's every mistake I made. Let me preface this by saying everything that I write about in my book, everything that I teach is because I made a mistake. In my class, the very first thing that I do, because we learn when we fail, we learn if we do it correctly. One of the first things I do is show one of the worst interviews that I've ever done. That's how I open the class. I say, hey, my name is Jon. I don't like long introductions. Here we go. And I throw the video on there. And it's a horrible, horrible interview. It was a homicide. And I just did horribly. And so what I talk about, these are the things that I see most common. I see cutting people off. People do that in general. I see probing too early. What do I mean by that? When you're doing an interview, it's a fact-finding mission. I'm just trying to get information. I'm not accusing you of a crime. Being accusatory is also a huge mistake. I'm not accusing you of a crime. It's victim, witness, or suspect. It doesn't matter. I just want to know what happened. Talk to me about what happened. And oftentimes we cut people off. We listen with the intent to respond and not to understand what they're saying. That is huge. It's a very common thing for most people. And then, of course, we talk about that. We talk about cutting people off, talking about being accusatory, being confrontational, being judgmental, things of that nature, and not asking enough open-ended questions. I started to talk about probing too soon. So if I'm asking somebody, hey, tell me about what happened today. And that person might respond, well, I met up with Frank. I got in the car. Oh, tell me about Frank. All right. And then well, tell me about that car. And what did I do? I cut them off. I probed too soon. I should have waited, allowed them to give me their full explanation, and then gone back when they were finished and then start probing. And we, veteran cops, do this. I did this for many years. I probed way too soon. And when you probe too soon, which is a very common mistake, you interrupt the flow of information that you're getting, victim, witness, or suspect. So that whole cutting off, being judgmental, being accusatory, being a jerk, I see that all the time. I see the arguing, guilt versus non-guilt. That's stupid. Just have a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Jon, if anyone wants to learn more, follow you, get in touch with you, or if someone who is in charge of training at their agency wants to have you come over, how can they reach out to you? How can they find you? Where on the internet? All this kind of stuff.
So I got two websites. I teach with a company called Advanced Police Concepts. You can just Google them, or www.advancedpoliceconcepts.com. I have my own website. It's called Extracting the Truth, just like the book. My book is on Amazon, Extracting the Truth. And I also have a TikTok channel and a YouTube channel. It's called The Law Maniac. And so it has some teaching videos, and then we do some other, it's all law enforcement related. So it's The Law Maniac on YouTube, The Law Maniac on TikTok, extractingthetruth.com on the internet, and then, of course, advancedpoliceconcepts.com as well, if you want to book us.